Hi, friends. So, host Eric's mad about something again. Thus, welcome to Talking with Fence People. Here comes a video. Here's the story. I was talking to some people, and I want to give you all the particulars here. The relevant factors in the story are the fact that I got triggered, regular DMT, 5-MeO DMT, MAOI, SSRI, the particulars of Rachel's case, the particulars of this conversation I'm about to relate. And the relevant characters are as follows, because I'm not going to name people except for me and Rachel. Miagity is the culprit. Me, Rachel, and Miagity, who's going to serve as a counterexample for something. Okay, so there's four short people in this story, plus the relevant factors. So here's what happened. Somebody came into a conversation that was occurring between me and Rachel and Miagity and a couple other people, and indicated that he had learned that with DMT, that regular DMT doesn't necessarily have a bad combination with MAOIs, but that MEO5 DMT has a bad relationship with MAOIs. So in other words, regular D, okay. 5D, bad with MAOIs. Now, Rachel had a bad drug interaction with some form of DMT and an SSRI. So, naturally, I asked a couple of questions such as, how does an MAOI relate to an SSRI and stuff like that. When Miagity initially said this piece of information about how regular D and 5D have differing degrees of compatibility with an MAOI, we established that, in fact, it would apply to the SSRI as well, because an MAOI is a earlier form of an SSRI that, instead of just working on serotonin, works on a variety of things, including serotonin. Now, it is true that if the negative interaction between the 5D and the MAOI is predicated on some aspect of the MAOI that's not serotonin, then it wouldn't apply to the SSRI, and Miagity is the one who made that point, okay? Note that Miagity and Miagity purport to be the same type. And as soon as Miagity made that point, I said, no, that's definitely right. You're right about that. You're right. I had no problems with that, right? Because he was correct that it would only be applicable and meaningful if, in fact, the reason the interaction with the MAOI is bad is linked to a mechanism that's common between the MAOI and the SSRI. So regardless, when this individual, Miagity, came in and told us a piece of information, I said, oh, that's interesting. I wondered then if maybe that would explain a lot. Rachel, the many times that she and I had smoked DMT prior to the serotonin poisoning event / neuropathy / drug interaction event, whatever you want to call it, that happened around Christmas, she never had any problems. But the one time we had the stuff that we had at Christmas, she had problems. So heretofore, I'd been explaining this as, and I might still, as she had been gradually building up too much serotonin and finally pushed her way over the edge all at once. And that explains why she was able to do it successfully before, but not this time, right? But of course, it would be a more satisfactory or satisfying explanation intuitively if it were a different thing. If it was this particular 5D DMT that simply is already established to not mix well with MAOIs, and that's what the problem was. And then that would also indicate that it would be okay for her to smoke regular DMT if she could be sure which kind she was getting again. So, regardless, before I could even begin to articulate, oh, that's interesting, that would explain some things, and that seems like it's a pretty decent explanation, Miagity said, I guarantee you've never smoked 5D, and you've never smoked 5D. So before I could even get into articulating my idea out that, hey, that would be a good explanation for this. That would explain a lot. He's negating the idea that it's possible that we ever had 5D. So I said, well, how do you know that we never had that? How would you know that? And he said, well, you've never had ego death. Therefore, yeah. So, of course, what he's really doing is saying, I've heard you talk about DMT before, and you didn't talk about it the way that I would have talked about it if it were hardcore DMT. Therefore, you didn't have hardcore DMT. Of course, that's complete nonsense, okay? And we're going to go through exactly why. And not only this, but when pressed, like, okay, well, why do you guarantee that I've never done it? He had only reasons like that. His intuition said, based on my reporting about experiences, I hadn't reported significantly enough a magical, life-changing experience to have really gotten serious DMT. So and certainly if I'd gotten 5D, then we would have had our minds blown to be a life-changing magical meow or whatever. And so he guarantees we've never done that. So naturally this pisses me off because, first of all, I've not even begun my affirmation, which is very conditional, which was to be that that very well could explain why Rachel, I couldn't even begin to get through the sentence before I get negated. No, that's not possible because I guarantee you've not done that. Now this is appropriate, maybe, when the antecedent of the conditional is definitely false. So when you don't affirm yet and somebody's preemptively negationary against your aff, it means basically they're going to the judge and saying, not only is my client innocent, but the prosecution can't even begin to make the case that my client is guilty because the thing they're accusing him of, which is vandalizing this shelf full of liquor bottles in the Ralph's at 8 p.m. on Saturday, I have proof and security camera and various photos that show he was actually in Hawaii. So it could not possibly have been him. That would be a preemptive negationary act that's appropriate. So it's like they're saying, my opponent, the prosecution in this analogy, cannot make the prima facie case that it's even possible for my client to have been guilty of the crime. So, as a consequence, we should throw it out before it even sees the court. There's nothing for the jury to hear. There aren't any case-level arguments to be made because the framework issue is determinate, okay? Now, this is also often done in bullshit ways to simply beg the question about matters in dispute. So, since the conclusion I want is already affirmed to be true, now we can move forward to this other bullshit that I'm building off and assume. We're hoping you won't notice that I've pretended as though something in dispute is not in dispute. So it's a bullshit way it's often used to do that. But in this case, he sort of meets the condition in the sense that what he is trying to say is I can't make the prima facie case that whatever information this line of thinking will provide will be revelatory about anything because he guarantees that I've not done that drug. But of course, that's the thing. If you're going to make that kind of claim, it requires an extra amount of substantiation, not less. And so what are some of the reasons why I'm mad about it? Why did it trigger me? Well, these are some of the reasons why it triggered me. His negation was resistant to my adjustment to an adversarial frame. So prior to his arrival, I hadn't needed to be quite so precise in my language because we were trying to understand each other and doing what you might call dialectical work. When he came in and said, "No, I'm not going to let you be I'm not going to let you be casual here." I said, "Okay, fine. I'll shift to a more adversarial frame," which means making less definitive claims, more conditionally, well, all I'm saying is that if it were the case that blah, 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 more of that kind of stuff. Also, I'm clarifying that I'm not affirming that we definitely did that. I'm just saying that it's possible, and there are reasons to prefer that explanation over the other. And when we've laid out the case, then we can evaluate it and make a determination as to. It's not like we can use empirics to determine what's absolutely correct. So we only have what's more likely to be correct, but it is informative about how we might behave in the future, right? So, as I adjust to be more careful in my claim making, more precise in my language, give the other person less that they could possibly object to, the objection doesn't change. In other words, he's not responsive to my attempt to live up to the higher standard of adversarial discourse as far as substantiation. In fact, and he's not upholding that same standard at all himself. So it's doubly offensive in that regard. This persistent preemptive negation of the antecedent, in other words, not just an initial, but that's not true, and then hearing, well, do you have a good reason for that? Well, not really. And then moving on, but instead persisting in the claim despite the fact that you don't have a good reason for it. Persistent preemptive negation of the antecedent requires more substantiation than a regular negation because it's trying to get the case tossed before it's heard, specifically on the grounds of factual innocence in this analogy. No reason for anyone, including him, to conclude that Y, which means basically that we definitely didn't smoke 5D, was definitely the case. There was no doubt that the most you could say, even if you were to put a great deal of weight on Miyagi's intuition, was that we probably didn't. So to guarantee that we definitely did and conclude that we didn't, and then persist in making that claim despite the fact that it's been established it's just his intuition behind it, and it's intuition based on something particularly loosely linked, namely my words about my previous DMT trips, and not really about the one that caused the problem, because that particular one, I tended to discuss it more in the frame of how important it was or significant it was in my relationship with Corey, the night as a whole. So the thing is, then what happens is he's interrupted me making this affirmation of mine with this preemptive negationary aff, and once I point out that he's basing this purely on things I said about the DMT trip that didn't cause the problem, then he has the gall to say, okay, well, then tell me about that trip. He's already completely failed as his intuition, right? In other words, he's intuited that I definitely didn't do that drug based on things that I said, not about the time that I did that particular, not about that particular time. So his intuition's already failed him utterly. He's already failed him utterly on multiple occasions. So I've explained to him that I don't talk about drugs the same way he does, but it's inconceivable to him that I might be right. He's wrong in the sense that he indicated that if I had really smoked 5D, that I'd have ego death like that which I experienced in the K-hole. Except that's absolutely not correct. Ketamine is a dissociative drug, and DMT is not a dissociative drug. The ego death I experienced in the K-hole, if you want to call it ego death, was simply a very, uncomfortable, kind of assaultive kind of confusion about who you are and how different parts of your consciousness link together. It was not at all a good thing. To the extent that what Peter Dintici is calling ego death, what he really means is he wants somebody like me to have a very powerful drug experience and come back and say, I see. Now I understand. I've finally broken through. I've seen how flimsy the ego really is, and a bunch of other magical nonsense. That will never happen because I'm not him. I don't react to things in stupid ways like that. I'm not a Carlos Castaneda book. I don't believe that drugs open the doors of perception. And I've never talked about them like that. And the thing is, it's not because I've never had huge, substantial drug experiences. So why Peter Dintici would think did I just say his name? Fucking goddamn it. Fucking Peter Dintici. It's your fault for being so fucking awful. Why'd you have to be so awful, right? Now I have to make this video explaining what awfulness looks like. What true awfulness looks like. This nature of substantiation rejects the burden of proof for the nature of the claim, even though it's a preemptive app, it doesn't matter. I'm just going to use my own intuition. Presumes his intuition regarding the drug trip outweighs my own negation of such, even though it's my drug trip and my subjective experience, and he has no access to the data. It links to a particular heretofore unused as warrant. So, in other words, the thing is, even the data he does have isn't about the event at question. And to then think that he can, after making the claim, ask me questions in this preemptive negation to see if maybe his claim was right. And of course, no matter how I answer these questions about that drug trip, he's using the wrong metric to evaluate it. The only way I would have convinced him is if I had a super magical experience or experienced ego death or something. But those kind of bullshit things are things that people think, but I don't. So the other reason this is particular heretofore unused as a warrant is this. I've already experienced the same kind of talk from my friend who gave me the DMT, but his warrant was I must be smoking it wrong, because he had the same kind of magical experiences with the DMT that we were both smoking that Peter Ntichi talks about, right? And so it wasn't until he actually sat there and watched me hit it really super hard and blow big ass clouds of it, and that he was able to even begin to acknowledge that maybe he should stop telling me I've not had a breakthrough experience and not really done it right yet, because I'm not talking about it in stupid ways like he is. It's not magic. It's drugs. They're for fun, not for opening the doors of perception or for any other kind of garbage like that. So knock it the fuck off, morons. There's implicit in what he's doing a negation of epistemological processes in favor of intuitive beliefs. The way we know things well, not just for ourselves, but for knowing things that generalize well or communicatively expressive, is to demonstrate the process. And like, you need to make out those arguments, you need to say out those words, you need to test them on their merits. In other words, the case needs to go before a jury unless there's actually good reason to say a failure to meet prima facie burdens and therefore throw the case out of heads on. If there isn't that kind of good reason, then everybody should be on board for it seeing a jury. That is, promoting the idea that the ideas get out there and get examined in full, rather than trying to cut them off at the pass. So in this instance, Migady's, which is Peter Ntichi's insistence on that I didn't do smoke 5D, which I'm not saying I did. Remember, I'm not affirming that I did. I'm saying that's possible. Okay. How does it fail? How does it undermine values in general and just across the board utterly fail? 1, argumentational inclusiveness. If we must accept my intuition says as definitive on a matter, then the arguments of everyone else are moot. Only his words matter. 2, objectivity about subjectivity. It's equivalent to this. I'm saying I might be referring to episode 15, but I'm not sure. And you say, no, you definitely aren't, because you said the episode you're referring to wasn't that hilarious. And 15 is super hilarious. Well, isn't it plausible that I just didn't find it as hilarious as you did? It's the same thing with drug trips. Peter Ntichi is kind of obsessed with trying to universalize meaning from drug trips. He's shared some videos with me that were interesting but wrong fundamentally. The most important thing though that he needs to learn is that that's not what drugs are for. Shit for brains. They're for fun, okay? Not magic. And you certainly can't tell me what my drug trip was based on whether or not I conform to your magical bullshit language that I'm never going to conform to no matter how hard the drug trip is. So, it violates on actual relevance. It gives NI a bad name. In fact, that was a really poor use of NI. It was wrong across the board, right? So it was wrong to assume that I hadn't. He was wrong to assume that he had enough data to conclude that. He was wrong to assume that his conclusions were more likely to be right than mine given the nature of the data. It was weak-ass, bad, shitty, horrible, disgusting, and I. 4. Failure on social grace. He disallowed me to even speculatively make a linkage and persisted in being an obstacle to me to expressing what I was trying to say. It fails on genuine caring. It sacrifices the reality of uncertainty regarding something important to favor him getting affirmation of his intuition as definitive on the matter. 6. It fails to validate on humility. Assumes his own language habits regarding a past subjective experience meaningfully provide a metric through which he can know whatever, about somebody else. This is a subset of 4 or 7, or both, really. 7. It fails to validate on logic and reason. It doesn't comprise a reason that justifies his claim, which is that we should throw this case out. It's just his gut feeling. 8. It violates on utility. It prevents me or someone in general from attaining the utility of the thing because he's so certain that he knows the way in which it might be useful to you, and he knows for sure that you're going to use it wrong. So the thing is, by laying out that possible explanation on the flow, I am not committing to it, right? I'm saying, okay, now I've got an alternate possible explanation, and I'll have to do some more thinking and maybe some research to determine how likely the former is or the latter. Now, what I know for sure is that I can, in no meaningful way at all, use anything that Peter Dintici says about DMT anymore, because he's predicating it on the assumption that he knows better than I do what my drug experiences are. So, I mean, it's really, really offensive on so many levels, you know. It undermines the capacity of people to take action. In other words, he then proceeded to bog down all actual discursive progress into a morass of his wildly overreaching and unwarranted claims, which tended towards the necessary but insufficient burdens variety. That somehow I needed to express to satisfy his standard that it's possible that I did a different form of DMT that night before he was going to let me articulate the fact that there were now 2 possible explanations and the specifics of those explanations. It's undermining self-understanding. He is assaultively of others, unaware of his own limits. In other words, even if you had good intuition, which tonight you demonstrated nothing of the sort. That doesn't mean you don't, but you demonstrated nothing like anybody would ever call good intuition tonight. Any sane person would call that insanely horrible, bad, assaultive intuition. But if assuming you do have some sort of good intuition, or even some intuition that has some competency, you're assaultively unaware of the limits of that attentional manner to justify certain kind of claims about other people. And yes, you can know the external world and what it is with your intuition. But what you're trying to know isn't the external world. It's my internal world. And you can't know that with your intuition better than I can. In other words, I do have to justify a claim like, I guarantee you didn't smoke 5D. I don't have to justify a claim like, wow, that was really intense. Or anything of the sort. And in order to do a real drug that has a real impact on you that's significant, I don't have to report about that experience in the same language that you do. There's additionally the fact that different drugs hit different people differently. You know, some people are impacted substantially by marijuana that they don't like to smoke it at all. Like STPs typically don't like to smoke marijuana that much. Some people find it have almost no impact at all. And, you know, some people are Motrin people and some people are Tylenol people. It goes down as basic as that even. So the thing is, there was some question after this event occurred as to why it was exactly, or some musings about why it was that triggered me, and that somehow he was stepping on my SI or something. Well, he was stepping on everything there is to step on, basically. There's absolutely not one single frame of reference that his words validate under, except he felt like saying those words because he doesn't want a more nuanced relationship with his intuition than that. I mean, it's like it doesn't validate on anything. So that's, if you want to piss me off, copy that example. I didn't intend to name him. I'm not necessarily regretful that I did. Because seriously, no, dude,